it's very muddled, and it's a confused, it's not a message song. It's like the voices in my head song and the paranoid Merrill song.
Yeah.
And I think that's to say, you know, from the beginning of 2 Yards, the music felt very vulnerable and very confusing.
That's Merrill Garbus from 2 Yards. I'm Michael Sokol, and this is Same Wavelength, a platform where I talk with artists about the relationship between their creative work and our current political moment. Over the last couple of years, I've been really struggling to make sense of what's happening in our country. Maybe you can relate. This is a place to hear how artists are making sense of what's going on, and it's a place where artists can speak their truths. Merrill Garbus is my guest on this first episode of Same Wavelength. I want to share with you a little bit about myself so you know what I'm bringing to this work and where my head is at these days, and share some intentions that I have for this podcast. If that's not of interest to you, by all means, you can skip ahead and jump to around the 7-minute mark where my conversation with Merrill begins. As I said, my name is Michael Sokol.
Hello, Michael Sokol.
Hey, Michael.
Good morning, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
One of the reasons I turn to the artists and the art that I turn to is because, honestly, it makes me feel less alone. For me, talking with artists is a super useful source of energy and discovery, and I'm realizing there's so much to learn from artists about how to navigate our world during trying times. I think artists can teach us how to better connect with our history, how to better connect with one another when we're feeling disconnected and overwhelmed. I recently moved to Los Angeles from Massachusetts, and Same Wavelength is inspired by previous work that I was doing at a radio station in Massachusetts. I started talking with musicians on the radio about politics, and, well, the conservative radio executives weren't so happy about some of that content. I also don't really think the radio is the right medium for these conversations. I was tired of having to cut them up into little sound bites because I think that they deserve to take on a longer form. I'm really concerned about the increased marginalization and discrimination that certain groups of people in this country are facing right now based on their race, their class, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion. I'm concerned about the urgency of our environmental crisis and how it's going to most impact the most vulnerable populations in this country and around the world for that matter. And I'm actively trying to figure out my relationship to these issues. As a middle-class, straight, white male born in this country, my privilege has protected me throughout the first 30 years of my life, and it continues to protect me from being personally marginalized or oppressed. Which is why I feel like I have a responsibility to be talking about these issues. Obviously, injustice and oppression are by no means new concepts in America, but with this administration's current attack on women's reproductive rights, a complete lack of accountability to address the ways in which mass incarceration and police brutality disproportionately affect people of color, the horrible, inhumane treatment of children and families at our southern border. These are just a few things on my mind right now. It feels like, given all of this, it feels like it's a good time to be talking about some of the pressing issues that our country faces right now. And I don't mean to only point out the negative. Same Wavelength is going to be a place to focus on the joy and the hope and the beauty that exists all around us, particularly that which can come from art. I'm finding that making a podcast is a lot. It's a lot of work, and I'm trying really hard to find my voice in this process and figure out the best way for me to be sharing the microphone. I'm definitely not unbiased in my approach, and I intend for this to be a place where I can learn and be introduced to new ideas and hopefully be proven wrong as well. I hope and I assume that you won't agree with everything presented here, either by me or the artists. I think that would be pretty boring if you did. So I invite you to stay as open to these conversations as possible. I have a lot of questions surrounding this project. Should I be talking with more people who I disagree with and who disagree with me? Are there certain voices that deserve to be heard more and louder than others right now? How can I honor someone as an individual while also simultaneously acknowledging that we're all part of larger group identities? Am I overly obsessed with race? Am I overly obsessed with identity politics? Is this mess that our country is in right now, is it inevitable that we're here given our country's history? How can I feel most empowered to speak my truth while making space for others to do the same? In no way do I claim to have the answers, clearly. I usually end a conversation with more questions than I begin with, so I acknowledge that this is a very much a learning process for me. And I see Same Wavelength as an invitation to myself to stay as open and vulnerable in this process as possible. Because of the timeline that it took me to launch this podcast, some of these first few conversations are between 6 months to a year old. Given the fact that we can turn on the TV or read the news these days and feel like we are just totally on a different planet. At first, I was nervous that some of these conversations would start to get stale or sound outdated, but I found that they tend to focus on larger systemic topics that transcend our fleeting and lightning fast news cycle. I'm super proud of these conversations. I think they really cover some interesting ground with some pretty incredible people. Listening back to them now is awesome for me because it reminds me of the continued relevance of certain topics throughout time, sadly, sometimes. With this, I hope that Same Wavelength might offer an opportunity for you, like it has for me, to slow down a little bit and to breathe and to rethink and reflect amid our oftentimes distracting media consumption. Lastly, I'm really grateful for your ears. There's so many places to be directing your attention these days. So it means so much that you're here with me, and so I thank you for that. My guest on episode 1 of Same Wavelength.
This is Merrill from Yards.
Merrill Garbus from Yards. Merrill, like myself, is from New England. In fact, she went to Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is where I lived for many years, and actually where I recorded this phone conversation from. Merrill has released 4 records under the name Yards. Her records have appeared in year-end best-of lists from places including Pitchfork, Time Magazine, Rolling Stone, New York Times, NPR, Village Voice. Her latest record came out in early 2018 called I Can Feel You Creep Into My Private Life. I spoke with Merrill right after the record came out, so we got to focus a bit on it throughout our conversation together. Anything that's referenced throughout our conversation, a song, a book, you can find all of that listed in the show notes for this episode at samewavelengthpodcast.com. And I put those show notes there because I hope that this podcast can be for you, like it is for me, a place of discovery. Here's my conversation with Merrill Garbus from Yards on Same Wavelength.
Hello.
Hi, is this Merrill?
Yeah, it is.
Hi, Merrill. It's Michael Sokol calling from Northampton, Massachusetts.
My goodness. I do miss Northampton, Massachusetts.
Oh, so nice of you to say. Yeah, you spent some time here.
A lot of time there, yep.
Yeah.
So good to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for some of your time today. I'm really excited to talk to you. So just to give you a quick little background, I'm doing this podcast where I'm talking to musicians and artists about how they're processing what's going on in the world, and how it affects their creative process, and really just trying to create a dialogue around the issues that we face right now and talk about how art fits into all of that.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Yeah. I'm sure it's stuff you think about on a minutely basis.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. I'll start by asking you if there's anything you want to start the conversation with, something that is on your mind, weighing you down or exciting you, that you'd like to start with.
Well, I think one thing that I think about often is different people's experience of this current moment in history in our country.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I feel like it's been really interesting to hear about other musicians dealing with political themes and, even just the fact that we're doing an interview specifically on this topic. It makes me wonder, first of all, that, for a lot of musicians, being political as part of music has been inherent in who they are and what they've always done. And just the fact that, suddenly for, me as a white cisgender woman, there's a lot that I'm feeling come up in the political sphere. But I wonder for other musicians, how this does this feel new, or does this feel like more of the same, or does it feel like more of the same, just really a lot more intense? I think, specifically about, white supremacy and white supremacists and racists rearing their ugly heads more boldly these days. But for people of color, knowing that was there so much of the time before.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, it's something I'm thinking a lot about as someone who, this is, it definitely feels like a moment of awakening for me politically. But you're right. I mean, a lot of people have been fighting this fight and dealing with this struggle for a long time, and it's nothing new for many groups of people.
Yeah.
And I guess it feels like a lot of people, myself included, are starting to wake up and see things in a new way.
Oh yeah, and I mean, to the point where I feel, I think on our last album, I heard some different reactions to, say, our song "Real Thing," where I said, "I come from the land of slaves, let's go Redskins, let's go Braves." I feel like there are a lot of people who are like, "Ugh, she can't get away with saying that." It feels, that maybe it feels too, I don't know what it felt like to some people, too obvious, too in your face,
confrontational,
right? And that same song, however many years later, I feel like resonates with certain people in a much different way.
I'm the real thing. They say I'm the real thing. I sound like the real thing. Singing real loud like the real thing. Making them proud like the real thing. I come from the land of slaves. Let's go Redskins, let's go Braves. You want the truth in tones? Dig this dirt and sift out the bones. They said I'm the real thing. I sound like the real thing. Joke's on you, all askew. Heard my name in Timbuktu.
Even the fact that as political, like, Two Nerds has been pretty political its whole existence. So even just the fact that right now it seems to be, kind of the same themes that I've been touching on album by album suddenly feel really a lot more relevant to certain people now than they have in the past. So,
yeah.
really,
well, the interesting thing in sort of the bizarre, I don't know if you want to call it silver lining of this administration is Trump has brought the debates of racism and sexism right to the surface. And this sort of this fantasy. And I mean, you're, totally. Like, you've been writing about this since, your first record, Bird Brains. And speaking specifically about race, this fantasy of like this post-racial America that so many of us were so comfortable with is getting torn apart. And it feels like, to me, a pretty necessary fracturing. So all this stuff is kind of bubbling up. I don't know. It's really an interesting time.
It really is. And I think that the past couple of days, I've been reminded of this acronym WAIT for Why Am I Talking?
Yes.
And I think that's the other part of this that I wonder about, and that's where kind of it's not even self-doubt, it's kind of just this trying to have a real humility around what is valuable to add to these conversations, particularly in art. So, I've thought a lot about, as a woman, talking about being a woman in this culture, because I think a lot of women are kind of, the Me Too movement has really called women to raise their hands in solidarity with each other about their experiences with harassment and assault. And I had a big conversation yesterday about, yes, and where is it useful for me to be quiet and listen? Where is it useful for me to amplify the experiences of people that I haven't, been paying attention to? For instance, I heard from a Native fan who's living in a California Native community, and she shared her experience with playing this album for her friends in her community and their reaction to it. And, where are the stories that are not, again, my story is often going to be, however non-mainstream I think I am. I'm pretty mainstream, I'm, again, white. I'm married to a white dude. I live in a very, upper middle class lifestyle here in Oakland, California. Where are the stories that are not being heard in the mainstream so much? And where are the moments where I use my exposure and privilege to amplify those stories instead of my own story, And then, I think that was the question on this album. Where is my experience as a white woman and the confusion and pain of that useful to share with other people, perhaps?
Yeah. Yeah. Spot on. Yeah. What a challenge, right? I mean, it's weird because I think wanting to, I don't know if speak for is the right word, but, to highlight the voices of those who feel marginalized and unheard, where that becomes self-aggrandizement. It's a fine line, right?
Oh, totally. And right. And also the whole issue, an issue that I often deal with in producing this radio show that I've been working on, which highlights the work of a lot of women of color, specifically.
Super cool.
Which feels awesome. And also is, it gets into this real dangerous territory of tokenizing.
Totally. Yeah, right on.
And I, something that I've been thinking about, though, is really the self-focus. I think, you almost said speak for, and I think that's where we get into trouble as white people. I am assuming that you're white. I have not met you before.
Yeah. No, I'm a white cisgendered male living in Northampton.
Yep, I kind of figured.
Yeah. Just to pause quickly, if you're wondering what does cisgender mean, and if you are already familiar with that, I hope I get this right. Cisgender is a term that is sometimes abbreviated as cis, C-I-S, and it describes someone whose gender identity matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. So I identify as a man, and I was assigned male as my sex at birth, so I'm a cis male. Cis is a Latin prefix that means on the same side of, and so you have cis, and then you have trans, which is a Latin prefix meaning across from or on the other side of. Someone who identifies as transgender has a gender identity that differs from the sex that they were assigned at birth.
And by the way, it is mostly white cis males that I'm talking to when I do interviews, and that's just kind of that's another interesting thing to note.
Totally.
Of who I end up having conversations with. But this whole, what I'm learning is how often people have, whether it's the Black community, whether it's, in the civil rights movement, whether it's the queer community, there's often a call to can you talk to your own people about this? Like white people talk to white people. And so that I want to, I feel like there's both this idea of amplifying stories and then really putting the mirror up and looking at my own experience and then, not suggesting let me just put a spotlight on race issues, which are the issues of people of color. No. This race issue is our issue of whiteness and white supremacy. So then, so I feel like that's been that's been really helpful to me because it makes, allows me to see value in telling my own story instead of feeling this kind of silenced feeling or a shame feeling that my story doesn't need to be heard or deserve to be heard, but instead that it is when we break open that experience of whiteness and we start really talking about it, where then are the opportunities for other white people to go, oh, well, I guess I have experienced white privilege, even though I'm poor, even though I grew up, even though I came up, pulled myself up by my bootstraps or whatever people's stories are, that they can maybe see themselves reflected in those stories. And then we, who identify as white can work with each other to get out of this mess.
Yeah. Merrill, as you engage in those tough conversations, do you have tools that you use to navigate them in a productive way that's not shaming and finger pointing, but in a way that's, trying to spread ownership and responsibility and accountability?
That's a great, I feel like that is the question because and I think that is also relevant to, say, climate change, things that just feel so overwhelming to people, myself included, that it's very difficult to make room to look at them boldly in the face. for me, it also comes up, I think that people kind of get into like an eye roll thing with me about cultural appropriation when I start talking about cultural appropriation in pop music. And I'm discovering that there's fatigue. People have this, a limited capacity to hear about the problems, how problematic cultural appropriation can be.
Would you call that white fragility?
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm going to interrupt again quickly just for clarification. If you're wondering, what is white fragility? This is a concept I was recently introduced to, and it's a term that was coined by Robin DiAngelo, and she has a really great book out called White Fragility, which I highly recommend. She suggests that as white people, we have a really hard time talking about race. We're extremely fragile when it comes to having conversations about it. One of the reasons that we get really uncomfortable and defensive at the mere suggestion that we're connected to the system of racism is because that suggestion goes against our concept of ourselves as good, moral people. Yeah, it does feel like through these systems of inequality and injustice that we're all so a part of and entwined in.
Right.
Because of that, we have such little stamina to have uncomfortable and charged conversations about race without getting really worked up.
Exactly. And without taking it personally and feeling defensive very, very quickly and guilty. And then, it's all about me. And right. So how do we, I hear that word resilience, how do we build resilience, and how do we, how do I continue to talk about these things and also, take care of myself, so in terms of tools, something that I'm working a lot of tools.
Yeah.
My tools are, first of all, educating myself. So, now we're in this, I feel like we're in a kind of golden age of understanding whiteness.
Yeah.
So we have these terms like white fragility now. That is so helpful to me to have language about this not being just a personal thing, but this being, like you say, systematic. So, there is a racial conditioning that I have been brought up in, and maybe that allows me to shed some of this feeling personally, I wouldn't say culpable, that's not the word I'm looking for, but that it's my fault, it
Sure.
just is. Yeah. It is what it is. And I think that, the first Tune Yards album before it was called Bird Brains was called White Guilt.
Really?
And, yeah.
Oh,
and
wow.
that, I think rightly so, people said, I don't white guilt might be in there, but it, to frame the entire thing
Sure.
that way. I've thought a lot about the usefulness or the uselessness of guilt. And it's useful up to the point where it propels us into some kind of action. Like if I have enough pain, then I'm willing to take action. But when it goes over that line of being paralyzing, that's when it's become just not useful anymore. And
right.
when I need to clear that out in order to, and that's where these ideas, this learning about systems of racism, systems of white supremacy, that there's a reason why these systems are in place and that we have the behavior and reactions that we do. That information in and of itself is just so helpful to move forward. So a lot of what I feel like our tools are books and articles and real, I would say also like specific articles that are not going to cause reactivity in me, but that are like very simply informative. This is what white fragility is. This is what it might look like. And then for me, another tool is that I have now a growing community of people that I can go to when I have uncomfortable, painful, confusing racialized experiences in life. And that is becoming more and more a really crucial piece of this for me, is knowing who to talk to and when to talk to them, and making sure that, that I have, I feel like I'm having both conversations with friends of color around things like how white supremacy and white privilege show up in the sphere of music and the music industry. And those are often, feel like really charged conversations for me, but feel really important. And then also the conversations that I know are more appropriate to have with white people, and, and not just any white people, but white people that I know are doing this work on themselves and have this kind of fluency that, like I hear that you have, of having examined a lot of this stuff already, having, having practiced what it is to kind of hold these things up to the light a little bit more.
Yeah. I love that you used the WAIT acronym. I was introduced to that in, not surprising, a meditation seminar that I was taking on wise speech. Mm-hmm. And I would like to ask you about your experience taking the 6-month anti-racism meditation workshop at East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland, and how that informed the songwriting process on this new record, if it did.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was maybe indirect. I was very, very conscious, and still am conscious of the confidentiality of that experience.
Yeah,
it was intentionally a very vulnerable, a place where we could be vulnerable and
totally
safe. But absolutely, and I think something that another tool for me has been the practice of mindfulness and meditation. That is, I think, a form. It builds resilience. How comfortable can I get with being uncomfortable, and how willing am I to let things arise and pass.
Yeah. And in doing so, rather than reacting to it, you are just noticing and observing it.
Exactly. And that is so useful for this stuff.
So powerful.
Yeah. And also that, because I think when I shut down is when I feel like I just can't bear anymore, because this is, because it's challenging my core belief about myself. And I think that this idea of the good white self was something that was brought up a lot in the East Bay Meditation workshop. Of, we're all these white people are sitting in this space because we want to do good.
Yeah.
We want to be good. We want to do right. We want to be part of a justice movement. We want to be part of making things in the world better. And we get attached to that. And that, just that I think a lot of what I learned in that room was, and in, conversations with people, was, first of all, how common our experiences were, and then also how different our experiences were.
Yeah.
But being able to really laugh at both this kind of collective experience of attempting to be good white people and the constant failure at that, and wearing that really lightly, and then also where I personally come to this work from. So for me, really understanding how I have a very specific lens. One lens is that I make a living doing something that is very much built on the hard work of people of color.
Yeah.
Very, very, very much. And I think most of us as white people can say that, but I think specifically pop music is so clearly built on that, and so clearly is built on a history of people of color not getting what they deserve for the work that they've done, that I have that very specific weight and feeling of responsibility and confusion.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I'm in the middle of reading this book that I want to just share with you. It's called Against Purity, Living Ethically in Compromised Times, written by Alexis Shotwell, who's a professor of sociology and anthropology at a school in Canada. And a lot of the book is about collective memory and our histories of slavery and colonialism, both in Canada and in the States. And she has this great quote that I wanted to share with you that I think is tied to what you just said. She says, "Any capacity we have to resist colonial oppression is in part based on benefiting from colonial oppression."
Right.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be a problem with, it's problematic for me to be writing an album and making money off of conversations of white privilege. That's inherently problematic. And yet, I guess the choice that I made in the idea was, and the feedback that I got was that this would be more beneficial than harmful.
Yeah.
That this is still toward a push into healing and into justice and into liberation for all people, and that is the push that I am trying to be part of and attempting to be part of, and that's gonna be flawed. It's gonna be problematic. Yeah. It's gonna be
no, totally.
Yeah. I mean, I think have you heard of this book or read Emergent Strategy?
No.
Okay. Well, what was the one you were reading? Against Purity? Against
Purity, yeah. Alexis Shotwell.
So cool. So I would deeply recommend this book, Emergent Strategy,
awesome.
Which a lot of what she talks about in it, Adrienne Marie Brown, is this idea of the smallest relationship or interaction. The idea of fractals, she talks a lot about. In fact, we're starting a new fund, that $1 for every one of our tickets goes into this fund. We did that last time around water issues.
Cool.
And it's going to be called the Fractal Feedback Fund.
Awesome.
Which sounds a little cheesy to me saying it out loud, but it's
sounds great.
Idea. It's very inspired by Adrienne Marie Brown and her idea of, fractals, that like the smallest piece is the same shape as the bigger piece that is created from, multiples of the same smaller shape. So, and we have this limited capacity as human beings. It's part of a tragedy of being a human being is how limited we are. But I have to think that when we just, in our very flawed and imperfect way, and that's why I think that would be really interesting to read that Against Purity book. But there are serious ripples when we do important work, when we do anything. So, if I've been thinking a lot about my personal capacity because I feel, I'm feeling almost 40. I'm feeling the kind of energy shift of growing older and having less of that kind of frantic 20s energy of, I got to make a band and I got to go on tour and I got to get in my Chevy and I got to drive 1,000 miles. And, I don't have that same kind of energy anymore. So where are these just the conversation that you and I are having right now, like there are going to be ripples of this conversation. And, we don't need to kid ourselves that we're changing the world with this one conversation. However, that this is touching other people. And if that's the case, how do I bring right into my relationships and my interactions with fans, with strangers, with people I don't know, with people I do know, how do I imbue those with the same philosophy or ideals that I want to be living?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think one of the things to me that is so cool about your music is it is imbued with these ideals and these themes, and in doing so, you explore some heavy and difficult topics, but they're also like embedded in super fun dance grooves, and it feels like, I don't know. I mean, are you ever concerned about maybe being too confrontational, or are you concerned about alienating your audience with your lyrics? Or do you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, concerned. Like I try not to let it in that way of from a songwriter point of view. I think I can't write songs if I'm like, well, what do people want me to say?
Sure.
So I try to stay a little bit sheltered when I'm writing because I really need to protect this honesty really what is my honest stuff coming up, and then letting that, speaking of purity, so like how pure can I let that be before I start letting in the idea that people will be listening to this music. And but of course, I mean, and I think I already have alienated people. I don't know, I think our fans are really open to and really want to, these are things that they're thinking about too. And so to have music to accompany that journey feels strengthening.
Yeah.
Feels, but of course, and that's okay. I mean, I think this, like this idea that we're talking about of white fragility, a lot of people want music for an escape. A lot of people want music so that they don't have to think about reality. A lot of people, and I guess that's how I hope to reel some people in with the danceability and the like just sheer joy and fun of the music. And then, if they're anything like me, the lyrics are really secondary for me when I'm listening to music. So can it just be this music that's enjoyable, and then like, what? Huh?
What did she just say?
What is that? What is white centrality? You know what I mean?
Right.
I want so badly to be liked. I ask myself, why was I nice? I ask myself, what should I do? But all I know is white centrality. My country served me horror coke. My natural freedom up in smoke. My people looted, feed us, lead us into the obscene. I mean, I'm not a desert island and I head up all the coast. I was so
Just to quickly provide insight into white centrality, this is another concept from Robin DiAngelo, and it's the idea that we live in a white dominant context. The messages that we're receiving from mainstream culture tell us that white people are more valuable than non-white people. You might be thinking, well, what do you mean? So a couple examples that DiAngelo gives are, as white people, we are central in history textbooks, in the way history is told and not told. We have centrality in media and advertising. The way we talk about, quote, good neighborhoods and good schools, think about who is in those, who's represented there. These are all messages that we internalize, and they come from and they perpetuate white superiority.
My question to myself is, can I let go of my fear around, because this is my livelihood, so like alienate too many people and I don't have a job anymore. But can I let go of that really primal fear of needing to take care of myself and put a roof over my head enough to let these words come out when it feels like they really need to.
Yeah. So as you've both simultaneously gained more fans and popularity and also grown as an artist, has that internal dialogue changed at all as far as, how emboldened you feel to say certain things?
I think probably I'm more, I'm probably emboldened in a way that is maybe not, maybe I feel bolder than I ought to, just in that, I feel so supported by our fans. I mean, that, that people are really listening to this and really consuming it, and that we are making a living doing this. So that's very emboldening, And also I think, I'm emboldened by the work of, organizers, activists who are so deeply committed to justice and have been doing that work before Trump and will continue to do that work after Trump. And, just as I understand the experiences of people who are really in battle, what really feels like a battle, and people who are actually feel physically threatened as they go through this, as they walk through my same community, that I'm walking in a place and having a very different experience of how my body is or is not safe. And that emboldens me, because I'm like, if look at of the women who started Black Lives Matter. I mean, they are putting themselves at such risk. I mean, people, they get threatened. They have to use bodyguards at times when, things feel really charged. They have grown up as people of color in this country, which means that they are seeing constantly Black bodies be devalued, dehumanized. So if all I'm saying is like I'm using white centrality in a freaking pop song,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like just to be right-sized about what my risk actually is.
Yeah, totally. Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Important. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, you making a song like Colonizer, while yes, it has risks, it's important to look at it in perspective of what risk is to someone else.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And I will say that, I remember sending the song Jamaican to one of my friends early on.
Yeah.
And, a friend that I really trusted musically. We had been, playing music together for years. And his reaction was kind of like, it wasn't what I wanted. It was like, this is weird. And I was like, I know it's weird. I really know it's weird. And I think probably what he was, I have to ask him about it, but like maybe what he was reacting to was like, the words are a little sketchy, because are you talking to yourself? If you're talking, are you talking to Jamaican people? I hope not.
Right.
Like where it's very muddled, and it's a confused. It's not a message song. It's like the voices in my head song and the paranoid Merrill song.
Yeah.
And I just, I think that's to say, from the beginning of Tune Yards, the music felt very vulnerable and very confusing.
Oh, yes, I do. I see you. I see you. Ooh, she's not Jamaican, see, I told you so. She's all white, she's not black, she doesn't have any soul. Get soul. She's not Jamaican, she's got total control. She's all right, she's uptight, she doesn't have any soul. She's all right, she's uptight, she doesn't have any soul. Get soul.
I was really sensitive to people's like or dislike or judgment or feedback about it from the beginning, because I had those same questions. Like, why, what does it mean for a white chick from, who's living in her aunt and uncle's basement in Northampton, Smith College graduate, what does it mean for me to be really into dancehall reggae right now and then make like singer-songwriter ukulele songs with that, with that influence? Like, what is that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I still don't know.
Yeah. But you're thinking about it. You're questioning. That's the importance.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like the way you just talked about that song of Bird Brains, it reminds me of Gangsta. Is that a fair comparison? With this sort of like, what did you call it? The confused Merrill or
paranoid?
Paranoid Merrill, exactly. Where it's like, right, who are you talking to? And then you do kind of flip it to look inward. But one of the things I really like, about Gangsta specifically, I love this, you say, what's a boy to do if he'll never be a gangsta? It feels non-judgmental while still questioning. There's sort of this more of a curiosity than a judgment.
Yeah. Absolutely. Which I think, I think that is that idea of questions versus solutions, questions. Even as we're having this discussion, I'm realizing how much of this is like, asking, what, like, what's up with this, instead of
what's that about?
This is bad. Right. What's that about? Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
What's that about? What's that about?
Instead of this is what this is about. For instance, just even the idea of cultural appropriation, a lot of time when I talk to people who love me, they're like, will you just get over it already? You're fine. Like, you've done so much in this arena, or like, you talk about this so much, and everybody, every musician is a cultural appropriator. We're all appropriating each other. And, there's a lot of, won't you just forgive yourself? And I think that the assumption that a lot of people make when I talk about cultural appropriation is that I'm like, therefore music is bad, or therefore this is bad, and I'm going to try. And I think that used to be an approach of mine, was like, let me do everything I can to be, again, a good white person.
Right. Or pure, right? This sort of fantasy of purity.
Right. And right. Which is a fantasy, yeah. Which is a fantasy. But like, where, I think the more we're talking about this now, the more I see how white fragility is so woven into at least my white experience and the white experience of so many other white people I know, which is like, no, but let's not feel bad. Let's anything to avoid feeling bad, anything, including being pretty irrational about, why can't we just have a conversation about this? So, Gangsta was written about some Asian kids in a neighborhood around here in Oakland. Everyone assumes that it's a song about a white person, I think, or white people. But the same question was, it's like when it's an open question, then it can be about so many different things. And that's certainly the kind of songwriting I prefer to do.
What's the boy to do if he'll never be a gangster? Anger in his heart, but he'll never be a gangster. If you move into his neighborhood, he'll never make a sound. Ooh. What's the boy to do if he'll never be a roster? Singing from his heart, but he'll never be a roster. If you move into his neighborhood, he'll never make a sound. If you move into his neighborhood.
I don't think, I'm interested in that both, with the idea of like, there isn't anything as purity. There isn't such a thing as purity, especially now. And there never was.
Yeah.
So how then can we wear these, and I think that's still useful, wearing them lightly. How do we wear them light enough so that we can engage with them and go, oh, that, I feel, that makes me feel uncomfortable, or that feels really negative, or that feels really painful, and I'm feeling some guilt, and and maybe I should talk about this with a white friend.
Sure.
But just that it's such a different and more gentle exploration. And, I really hope that because that kind of gentle exploration is so new for me, because I have come from a place of such guilt and shame, specifically around race and around cultural appropriation, that I really hope that there's, and maybe it's too much to think about, but in this album, that there is a kind of allowing for multiple experiences of the music, and I think of that song Honesty, of, the invitation to close your eyes, get in touch with the physical sensations, that's all from that meditation practice of, this invitation to just sit with stuff, and not take it on so personally, maybe.
Close your eyes. Get in touch with the physical sensations coursing through your body. Breathe.
Yeah, it's funny. Honesty kind of reminds me of, well, that you asked the question, do you really want to know? And it sort of it triggers in my head that your song from Nicky Nack, "Look Around." Let's not pretend that the world around us isn't falling. There's on the one hand, there's what sounds good, and the other hand, what's true.
Exactly.
On the one hand, there's what sounds good. On the other, there's what's true. Beware the empty promise all around me, all around you. Let's not pretend that the world around us isn't falling. But look around, look around, look around. All we need is all that we can see.
And again, it's like this idea that this isn't always going to be comfortable or easy or always feel good, but there are conversations to be had, and we, have a responsibility to stand up to.
Yeah. At least, that to me allows me to feel the good things more truly as well. Like to feel joy more truly. That it's not joy to cover up pain. It's joy coexisting with pain, and that to me has just become something that feels so much more true. That kind of joy that can coexist with, good, that can be in reality instead of in fantasy.
Yeah. And that word fantasy, I feel like it's come up a lot in this conversation. And it also, Coast to Coast, another song on the new record. Is another song that, I don't know, I guess trying to confront reality, right? In that song, is there also an attempt to understand how polarized we've become also?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that was written, a good part of that was written before the election, which was, a huge buildup of polarization.
I don't know the language, all the words mean fear. This land is sinking as I try to get clear. Knowledge then wisdom, the answer's right here. Burn the sage and sow a seed. Nobody left to feed. Coast to coast, right, left, fantasy, fantasy. Don't let them pave my feet down or I'll drown. Right, left, from coast to coast. Never learn to say goodbye. See you in the middle when the walls come tumbling down to the sea.
And I have family in various parts of this country.
Yeah.
I have family who I'm sure if we got down into it would have really different political views. And that has really been a blessing to see how we just, demonizing people that we don't agree with is just as dangerous as engaging in the behaviors that we accuse them of, I just really believe that.
I do too. Thanks for saying that. And it feels like we've become more and more reactionary and demonizing of those who don't share our beliefs.
Exactly. Which is what whoever they is, that's what they want.
Yeah.
I think that's, again, systematic.
Sure.
If we're all pitted against each other. And certainly that happens, I think a lot about how whiteness came to exist anyway. That, before this idea of white racial supremacy, there were a lot of poor working white people who identified way more with, I was just reading about that book, Sugar in the Blood, about Barbados. And, there are plenty, like the white workers that had no rights. They were basically indentured servants. And so they had much more in common with black slaves from Africa than they did with their owners, with these people who had power over them. And it wasn't until there were literally more black bodies on the island and the white owners went, oh shit, we're in trouble, that they started these, that the whole, other thing came in. Like, they are other. You better get with us, because at least that, you have a leg up over these people from Africa because of your skin color. And that was totally a very political move. And so I just, I think it's, we get so into these ugly conversations on Facebook and Twitter, and, so much is us, them, and it makes me really mad.
Yeah, me
I gotta
too.
say, like, the white liberal, I don't know what to call it, but there's a real sense of entitlement and of we're so much more
enlightened or right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it makes me mad. And I think there's a program that deals with, it's called the untraining, and it's like specifically like white liberal racism, because that is so real, and white, I even feel myself distancing from the word liberal because preferring the word progressive because it feels more true, but that, we have a lot to answer to as white liberals, and a lot to explore in ourselves that we deny ourselves when we think we're so right. And so that's a lot of what Coast to Coast is about.
Yeah. Do you feel like, you mentioned some family members, do you feel like, whether they're family members or audience members or whatever, kind of as you tour, do you feel like you're able to engage with a variety of political ideologies?
That's a really good question. I think so. And I really hope so.
Yeah.
That would be the best.
Yeah.
I know that around the election, I just, Trump is just so not okay with me that I know that I lost some people who were Trump supporters and fans of ours, which to me was like this weird realization moment where I was like, wait, what? We have Trump supporters who are our fans, and then also like horror. Like, how could you listen to this music and also vote for Trump? But then the realization, like, oh wait, of course that's totally possible. And did I just blow it? Did I just blow the opportunity to be in conversation with people who voted for Trump? And I really hope not. That would be really a tragedy. And again, I think that's, this idea of white people needing to talk to other white people, it might not be something that I'm particularly interested in doing or wanting to do. But I feel like that is where the work is, I thought the work was in trying to be a better white person around people of color, or, trying to make myself right and more perfect as a good white person. And now I'm hearing that the work might be in having extremely messy conversations with other white people.
Yeah.
Which feels like a really interesting challenge.
Yeah. Merrill, thank you so much for your time. This has been really great.
This has been awesome. Yeah. Really cool. And really, I'm so thrilled that you're doing this.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Merrill. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Okay. You too. Bye.
A big thank you to Merrill Garbus for her time and interest in this project. Anything that was mentioned throughout the conversation, you can find all of that listed in the show notes at samewavelengthpodcast.com. Make sure you're following the podcast on social media, on Instagram and Facebook. It's Same Wavelength Podcast. And on Twitter, Same Wave Pod. I post snippets and previews there of upcoming episodes and other fun stuff, so make sure you're following those. If you dig the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review it on whatever platform you're using. That really helps me to reach more folks. This conversation was edited for brevity and clarity, though I made a sincere effort to retain Merrill's words and ideas in their most honest form. Thank you to the University of Minnesota Press for their permission to let me quote the line from Alexis Shotwell's book Against Purity. Thank you to Tune-Yards label, management, and publisher for permission to let me use the songs throughout the conversation. The theme music that you're hearing right now and that you heard at the beginning of this episode is an instrumental version of a song by my band Bunk. It's called Turn the World Around. I also use an instrumental version of our song The Story of My Morals at the beginning of this episode. You can find both of those songs in the playlist in the show notes for this episode, samewavelengthpodcast.com. Thank you to my bandmates, Brett and Dave, for being cool with me using these songs for the podcast. On the next episode of Same Wavelength, I'll be talking with Anais Mitchell.
Suddenly the light turned on for me, that it felt more important or more like my role to tell stories and kind of humanize a political situation than to write about it as if I was writing like a letter to the editor. At some point you kind of have to make the choice like, well, is this a letter to the editor or is this a song?
Anais Mitchell's musical Hadestown is currently on Broadway. It's a super cool retelling of the Eurydice and Orpheus myth. We talk about the relevance of that classic Greek myth today and also her evolution as a songwriter over her career. I'm Michael Sokol. Thanks for listening to Same Wavelength. Be good to yourself and be good to those around you.